Hi and welcome back to this video. Today we're going to talk about how to learn Spanish as a beginner. What should you first focus on when you try to learn Spanish? What do you do in the first few days, weeks, and months of your learning? And how do you eventually move on to the intermediate stage where ideally you can watch series and read books that are meant to be watched and read by natives? First things first. Learning a new language takes a lot of time, so don't be disappointed if you don't see the progress that you had hoped for after just a few days of studying. You probably won't see any progress or notice a difference up until about 3 months of consistent studying. Speaking of consistency, it doesn't mean that you have to study every single day, but you should probably try to aim for about 30 to 40 minutes about 3 to 4 times a week at least. After about 3 months of consistently dedicating that time to learning Spanish, you will notice that you have built a solid foundation. You should by then know the basic core vocabulary, have an idea of how the conjugations in Spanish work, as well as what general sentence structure looks like, and you should have a pretty solid grasp of the pronunciation. So, how do we go about that? The first thing we want to do is have a look at the Spanish IPA, just to kind of figure out what sounds there are in Spanish that aren't present in our native language. And then you can practice these sounds by listening to the audio and then repeating the sound as best as you can. This also works with whole words once you have a feeling for each letter and what each letter is supposed to sound like. You can, for example, go on Forvo and listen to words that were uploaded on there and then try to repeat them as best as you can. This is not about getting it perfect from the very beginning. There's no way you're gonna get it all perfect right on the first try, but this is more about being aware of the differences that there are between your native language and the Spanish language. You can avoid a lot of awkward pronunciation mistakes by just having a look at the IPA chart every once in a while and to make sure that you're still on the right track. There's really no reason to have an awful, horrible pronunciation all throughout the beginner stage just because you wouldn't spend 30 minutes looking at an IPA chart and practicing the pronunciation a little bit. Next up is vocabulary, because what else are you gonna learn? If you don't have any words, you can't make sentences, you can't understand anything. Words are the basic building blocks of any language, Spanish as well. And since we already learned how to pronounce all these words, we can now learn the words and pronounce them the way they are supposed to be pronounced. Important note, in Spanish nouns have a grammatical gender, so make sure you learn that gender with the noun. Luckily, the rules for that are pretty simple and straightforward, and there aren't as many exceptions as some other languages might have, but make sure you do learn it with the noun. And once you've learned a few words, along with the words, you want to start to learn the grammar of the language. The grammar is essentially what gives the language a structure. While you have all these different word blocks, you still need to stick them together in a way that makes sense. And different languages do that in different ways. In Spanish, you probably want to pay attention to the basic sentence structure, verb conjugation, and how adjectives behave. On top of that, I also like to learn set phrases like I want to something something, I like to something something, I think that something something. All these things are set phrases, they're always going to appear in the same structure, so in the beginning it can be helpful to just learn those by heart before you even understand what the underlying structure does. That way you have a few more tools at your disposal to navigate through the language and hopefully through communication. This next step might sound scary to some of you, but hear me out. What you want to do once you have accumulated some vocabulary and you have a basic understanding of the grammar is starting to read. Reading is an immensely powerful tool to learn even more vocabulary in a very engaging way, rather than just looking at flashcards or going through your textbook. Reading is literally supercharging your vocabulary, your comprehension, and probably also your grammatical understanding of the language. But obviously you can't just go out and read whatever you want, because in the beginning your vocabulary is still so limited. So ideally you want to start with something that's called graded readers. Graded readers are an amazing tool because they start out very easy. They use very simple vocabulary, very common vocabulary. The sentences are rather short and they don't have complex grammatical structures in there. But then as you read more and more of them, as you move up the stages, the vocabulary gets more and more complex, the sentences get longer, but it is a very gradual process so that you don't have to jump into super difficult texts right from the beginning. If you want to boost your vocabulary learning and your reading experience even more, I recommend you to use something like Link or Migaku that lets you look up words that you don't know instantly. Just one click, you know the word, you continue reading. You don't lose time copy pasting into an online browser or even worse, looking things up in a physical dictionary. But if that's what you're into, that is perfectly fine too. It is just a lot slower and might be more frustrating. As long as you consistently read though, you will definitely make progress. As a last step, we want to do listening practice, because at the end of the day, we also want to be able to understand the spoken language, right? But just like with reading, we're going to be really bad at that at first, because we just don't have the vocabulary to understand when two natives are talking to each other, for example. We also don't have the necessary brain power to parse the language, to understand naturally spoken language. That is why there are channels like Dreaming Spanish that provide comprehensible input. Those videos follow essentially the same method as graded readers do, in that they start out very slowly, they speak very clearly, and they will make sure to have a ton of emojis and pictures on the screen to make sure that you understand what is being said in the video. And it sounds crazy, but give it a try for a few weeks and you will notice how much more you can understand after those few weeks. Do these things for 3 to 6 months and you will notice how much you have improved from essentially nothing. At that point, you might be interested in upgrading from graded material and comprehensible input videos to materials that natives would also read. A lot of people start with reading Harry Potter, for example, as their first, so to speak, real book, and whatever is comprehensible enough for you, give it a try. At that point, to continue learning and improving your Spanish, it is really important to adopt an inquisitive mindset. To find out more about the right mindset to learn a language, feel free to check out this video. Happy language learning, and I'll see you in the next video.